Welcome to It's Not You, It's Grief, a safe space to have candid conversations surrounding the many faces of grief. How do you handle the process while moving forward and ultimately getting back to living in the moment? Come on this journey as we navigate grief through the art of storytelling. And now for your host, Ahira Smith.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's great to see you all here. My name is Ahira Smith. I am known as the Grief Mending Coach, and I appreciate each and every one of you who are still with me on this journey called life, specifically more so with this podcast called It's Not You, It's Grief. It's great to be back. Today's conversation is one that touches on love, loss, and strength. It takes to keep moving forward after unimaginable pain. My guest has generously agreed to share his story of losing his wife to suicide. This is deeply personal and a vulnerable topic, and I want to begin by honoring his courage in speaking about it. My hope in sharing this conversation is that it not only helps others who may be carrying grief of their own, but also reminds us all the importance of compassion and connection. I invite you all to listen with an open heart as we hold space together for his journey and the memory of his wife. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to Howard. Hi, Howard.
Hi, Hira. Thank you for having me on today.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be on. I really do appreciate it. So, Howard, if you'd be so kind as to just tell my audience exactly a little bit about yourself and about your lovely departed wife, Beth, I'd appreciate it.
Like I was, I'm always proud to speak about my wife. This has been something that's very hard for me. I've because of what I do for work, I've represented athletes like Michael Strahan and Brian Westbrook. So I've done probably 100 podcasts. I've written about my wife on Facebook. I've talked about her with my friends, but I've never really done something like this publicly before. So it's a different kind of thing for me, but I think sharing is important and something I want to share with you and the people that are listening. If you can be vulnerable enough to share, it will come back to you in ways that you can't even imagine. One of the most powerful notes that I've ever got was after a post I made about my wife, Beth, on Facebook. And it came from someone who I had worked with for a very brief period of time when I did real estate for maybe 6 months, and they had been a client, and that person reached out and basically said that, thank you for sharing. Like, I had been thinking about ending my life, and when I read your post about Beth, I realized that if I did that, I would destroy my husband and children forever. So when someone tells you that you had a role in keeping them here, it's kind of hard to stop sharing after that.
Absolutely. I have not had experience in terms of losing a loved one to suicide. I have, though, been connected with people who have attempted it. I've even had people who shared with me that they too were thinking about ending their own life, and that if it wasn't being at the right place at the right time, they might have succeeded in that mission. And so I don't want to ever sit there and say I know what you're feeling or what you're going through, because that would be an insult. But I do want to just commend you on the strength and the courage that it takes for you to deal with this every single day, because whether you talk about it, or you write it in your blogs, or just having conversations, it's always with you because of the love that you had for your wife. It's always with you. So again, I just honor you for just being in this space with me and to share uh, your knowledge on it, especially around this time of the year. This is known as Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. And a lot of people tend to shy away from this conversation because of the stigma to it, but it impacts people more and more on a day-to-day basis than folks want to admit. So again, thank you so much
No,
for
and
just
I'll,
being
I'll,
here.
I'll be honest. I wish we had a month for the survivors of suicide, because people often forget about the people who are left behind and have to deal with this. And I can promise you, I lost my grandmother, who was probably my favorite person in the world when I was a child. I lost my father to cancer, but my grandmother was in her 90s and my father was 87. And
Mm,
they were also not the people that you live with every day.
mm,
So when you lose someone before it's their time, and especially when it's that person you live with every day, it's a very difficult thing to deal with. And I realized right away from talking to people that, first of all, just to address a couple things that I often see people write when they talk about suicide, is we didn't know. We,
mm,
they we just talked to him yesterday. He was so happy. What did we miss? And I can tell you, they didn't miss anything. There is no guilt to have. There is no nothing, because when someone decides this is what they want to do, that's probably what they're going to do. And with my wife, there was no did I miss anything, because she was screaming it from the rooftops.
mm,
You, the I can't take this anxiety. I'm going to kill myself. And so I went to work. I didn't just sit back.
mm,
And she had never gotten professional help before.
mm,
And with the help of a close friend who works in the mental health field, I got her a therapist. But I could tell, you know, the mental health system today, in my opinion, is broken. We offer people two things. First, we lock them up in the psych ward. The moment they think that they're not going to kill themselves, they send them home. So we might have kept them alive for a night, but we haven't solved the problem and we haven't really accomplished much. Then my wife went to a higher level of care, what's known as a PHP, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It stands for Partial Hospitalization Program. And you take a period of time off of work, and I think it was like 6 or 8 weeks, and you have intensive therapy like 6 hours a day. And, you know, I have some bitterness towards the medical system because, frankly, they saw me as an intrusion whenever
mm,
I tried to advocate for my wife. And that used to bother me tremendously, because they're telling her family and myself that she's getting better, but they don't see what happens when she gets home from that therapy.
mm,
And it was painful. Her anxiety was so bad. She would lie on the living room floor, and I'll never forget it, for hours. And when I say hours, I mean 4 to 6 hours at a time.
wow,
And me, I can't try to meditate for that long. If it's not happening in 20 minutes, I'm probably giving up.
right,
And to see her just lay there, and, I'd watch a television show or do some work, and go upstairs and very quietly, and I'd look over and she'd still be on the floor. So this went on, probably was right after, a couple months after my father passed away. This probably went on for about 9 months or so. And, you know, unfortunately, I kind of had to go it alone because there wasn't really much help from her side of the family, which is something that I've learned I'm just going to have to live with and try to get over with. Not over, but what my therapist calls it is living around the grief, because your feeling for your wife is never going to go away. This is not something you're going to be able to forget. So you have to face it head on and you have to deal with it. And that's one of the reasons why I agreed to do this. And when I was looking for therapy, I did some research and I spoke to someone from Same Here Global, Eric Cusson, who's a tremendous guy who also worked in the sports industry and had some mental health issues and now is a mental health advocate. And I talked to Eric, and, you know, what I learned is traditional therapy doesn't really work for traumatic grief. So what I decided to do was a therapy called EMDR. And I can't really tell you what the initials stand for, but I know it has something to do with your eye movement and desensitization. But basically, in EMDR, you process the things that are the hardest for you, like the fact that I was in the house when my wife died, the fact that I walked in the room and found her body. You know, those are things that will never leave you, but you have to try to build a new life for yourself around that grief. And
Absolutely.
for my wife, you know, I always realized that she had some depression and she was somewhat of a loner, not the most social person, but the anxiety didn't really start till she moved up the ladder at work.
Mm.
And then she, you know, she worked for someone that was particularly tough, but some people are built for that and some people aren't. And I just watched the anxiety get worse and worse and worse. And she had some fears that probably weren't rational. So between that and the anxiety, it got to the point where she literally didn't know what to do to help herself. And when you watch that go on for 9 months and you're worried about your wife killing yourself for 9 months, that's going to take a big toll on you. And that's why I talk so much and I'm so passionate about people thinking about those that are left behind. You know, when somebody dies, you see them do GoFundMes, you see them raise money. Nobody really does much for the people that are survivors of suicide.
Wow.
And they mistakenly assume that because X amount of time has gone by, that you will be over it or not feel it as much. And another thing that from this journey is that grief is not linear. There will be days where you feel it worse. There will be days that you don't think about it. But I can tell you, for me, since this happened in April of about almost coming up on 3 years now, there hasn't been a day where I haven't thought about my wife and what happened.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing and putting that out there. And uh, it's trauma. As you said, it's definitely a big trauma for you and those who are left behind. And you're right, there isn't enough support or conversations for those who are dealing with the so-called aftermath, because of that stigma, people do view it as an aftermath. You know, where do the survivors go when the phone calls stop happening, or people stop checking on you every day, and then it gets far and few in between? It's like, where
And
is
that
my safe space?
happens quicker than you think.
And you know what? I think part of that is because a lot of times, again, because of the stigma to it, people just don't know what to say. People aren't educated on how can I be of help. You know, do I mention her name, or do I not say anything? Do I try to pretend like it didn't happen? And this is where we need to re-educate people when it comes to grief, that regardless of how it happened, or how long it occurred, or when it occurred, empathy still is vital, very much so, you know. And so one of the questions that I have is, when, and I know for me, there's been a level of ignorance that I can admit when it comes to this topic. When you hear people say, oh, well, it was their choice, it was by their choice, there are those who would disagree and say that it was an illness. I'm curious as to you, of what you've seen and what you've learned since your wife's passing. Do you think it's a combination of both, or where do you feel on that, whether or not it was a choice, or it was more so an illness, or both?
It's interesting that you asked that question, because there's a debate that I see ongoing on LinkedIn
Okay.
where people are concerned about the verbiage, where they want you to say your wife didn't commit suicide, she died by suicide, because commit has a negative connotation. But to me, those things are kind of semantics.
Okay.
Whether she died by suicide or whether she committed suicide, she's still not here. So to me, that's not really, and I know some people feel very passionately about it, but it's not really a debate for me, because it's not something that I consider important in my grief journey, really.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
but to answer your question, I think it was both. Um, like I said, I think there are certain people that are built for certain things, and if you put the same type of pressure on a different person, they might not be able to deal with it as well. Um,
Mhm.
and that's not a weakness or anything like that. You know, I myself, you know, as I confided in you, I suffer from anxiety. I have for some time. And with my wife gone, it's only gotten even worse.
Mm. 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 Okay. Okay.
But in terms of her journey, you know, part of it was job related stress. And I think part of it was the fact that she had mental health problems. Um, and that's nothing to be embarrassed of. You know, when
Mhm.
I tell people I go to therapy, I hold my head up high, because I think that when you try to fix yourself and make yourself a better person, that's not something that should have a stigma. That's not something you should be ashamed of. That's something you should be very proud of.
Yeah, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. When you reflect on your journey since your wife's passing, what has been some ways you found strength, or even moments of calmness, peace through such profound grief?
Mostly my friends. I'm very lucky to have some really good friends that, you know, like you said, when the phone calls stop coming and people, the neighbors stop knocking on the door, you know, I have friends that to this day, if I call more than once, they know that means I need to talk. Um, and I don't really think that you can, this is something that's very difficult to get through on your own. And like you talked about, that human connection, that empathy. I've had people say that to me many times, and I meant to touch on it before, so I'm glad I thought of it now. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, I feel so terrible for you, but I don't know what to say. And my answer is always the same. You don't have to worry about bringing up her name. You don't have to be careful about what you say. You don't even have to know what to say. Just the fact that you're on the phone with me right now is helping me. And I think you have to let your friends know that. You know, sometimes you have to come right out and say, listen, I'm struggling. I need your help. And I've done that with my friends. And fortunately, a lot of them have been there for me.
Well, I'm glad. I definitely your tribe, your community, that's essential because none of us are able to make it through this journey called life without somebody being present. And the fact that you have been able to find some support and more importantly, feel safe within yourself to where you can share that with others, that speaks volumes because you said it before. A lot of times, you know, there isn't a space safe enough for survivors of suicide loss. So people are internalizing a lot of stuff that's come across their way. And when you have that two or three or a few people that you can go to, or that networking event or community to where you can just sit in space. Don't even have to say anything, but just sit there and you can just connect with other people and they're like, I know, without even having to say, I know. That speaks volumes. And I
I'm
think that's
still
because of vulnerability.
I'm still working on the getting out there and meeting new people part of this.
Well, that's okay though. Honestly, listen, nowadays, because there's just so much commotion even in the world, a lot of folks are just reluctant on putting themselves out there, whether it's professionally or socially, it takes a mental and emotional toll, or even spiritually. I think it's okay that we admit that. It's okay not to be okay, and it's a challenge because not everybody has good intentions. Not everybody is going to say the right things all the time. You're going to run into somebody who might have had a bad day because of something else that they're going through, and guess what? They're going to project it onto you, and you're like, "Wait a minute, I just came to get me a cup of coffee." So it's totally okay, and I think as long as we continue to remind ourselves that it's okay not to be okay, and we just be present within the moment and not worry about the coming days and months, just be present in the moment. I think that's just valuable lessons in itself. It really is. um you mentioned how the mental health area, or our healthcare in this country, is very less than desirable because they just don't put forth, they didn't have any type of netting, if you will, to support those of us who are going through grief, especially traumatic grief like this. um my question to you is, what do you feel could be done more to change that within the medical health care arena?
That's a great question and something that I've actually given a lot of thought to. And I think things like, you know, the NFL now with their support of breast cancer. Um, you see when it's breast cancer month, they wear pink cleats and things like that. Um, Another thing the NFL does, and I know particularly about football because of my job, obviously, but they have a program called My Cleats, My Cause, where players for one game, because if you do it any other game, you're going to get fined. But for one game, they're allowed to wear custom cleats And some of them, like, I forget what player it was, but I know somebody had the mental health organization, Same Here Global, painted on their cleats, like I mentioned. And I'm remiss in not remembering who the player was, but I think things like that, that are public and bring light to it, like we have a suicide prevention month, we have this month, we have that month. I don't think we have a survivors of suicide month. And we have walks for suicide prevention, and a lot of those people who do that are probably survivors of suicide. But I've yet to see even one program that was specifically designed for the people that have been left behind. And that was actually one of the reasons that led me to reach out to you on LinkedIn. Because when I saw your profile and what you do, I said, this might be something that could help someone who's in my position.
I appreciate that very much so. And you know what? I do know that there is a day in November. I think it's called the International Day of Survivors of Suicide Loss. I think it's like the Thursday before Thanksgiving, if I'm not mistaken. I have to look at my calendar, but that, like you said, that one day, it's not enough because you're living it every single day.
Everybody else gets a month. We get a day.
And honestly, it wasn't even until like the last couple of years that I've noticed like every month is something. It's like, oh, okay, we knew about breast cancer awareness month, and we're like, okay, but that month is also domestic violence awareness month. It's also pregnancy, infant child loss month, and then there's prostate cancer in this month. And I'm just like, where did all these months come from?
Everybody knows what the pink ribbon is for, but do they know what the other colors stand for?
That part. And I think because like the last 5 or 6 years in terms of what happened globally with the pandemic and stuff, I think people are putting more emphasis on the mental health element more so than ever before, because we're talking about it, things that have been.
There's more people having, if there's not more people having problems, like you said, there's more people vocalizing it.
Right.
And I think the pandemic, it was very difficult to get a therapist during that time.
Oh, yeah.
Because everybody in America was in therapy.
Right. Everybody was in therapy, and the go from face to face in person versus virtual, even that was just alarming, because people were just like, I'm so used to that connection, and now I got a screen here, or I'm doing it on my camera phone because we're trying to be safe. That was a level of anxiety.
I'm that person, because in the beginning, I said to myself, I can't do this on the phone. I need the person sitting right in front of me.
Yeah.
And slowly, the human mind and the human body, it's incredible what we can adapt to.
Oh, yeah.
And just like I don't think I could learn online if my classes were online. Eventually, if I was forced to, I would probably learn how to. So now I actually prefer to do therapy in the comfort of my own home. And I actually prefer teletherapy versus having to get up and go there in person.
Yeah, it's everybody, and like it's just like we talked about grief and the journey of it itself. There's some ebbs and flows in it. There may be like, look, I do better if I'm virtual, and then it'll be like, you know what, I kind of want to see you. This one's a little bit heavier. So I think as long as people are
also
flexible.
times where you're sitting here and you're saying, I am so anxious. I couldn't go anywhere, but
yeah,
I can take this phone call.
Absolutely. And I think people, again, need to be aware of that levels of anxiety is real. And it's okay if you're like, look, I'm not feeling up to meeting you. Can we just talk? Can texting is okay, but let's just talk virtually on the phone or something on the phone, So I think that's also something we need to make people aware about anxiety, because it is very much a factor, So, um, how has your experience shaped the way you think about mental health? Not just personally, because I know you talked about your own relationship regarding that of anxiety, but also how you engage with others who are outside of your community, outside of your tribe.
I think it's made me much more aware that the person I'm talking to may have problems that I don't even know about.
Mm.
And what I've found is that the more open you are with people, you'll be surprised at some of the things you hear back. Um, and in speaking about my wife to a woman that I used to date, she confided in me that a couple of years ago, she had her own suicide attempt. And
Mm.
that was an enormous surprise to me.
Wow.
And there is no type of person that commits suicide. I told you I have a close friend that works in a hospital where the care is about mental health, and they see everybody, she said, from the janitor to the CEO. So this is something that I mean, I don't think we can talk about it enough, because it literally touches everybody in our entire society. And anxiety and mental health don't discriminate on the basis of color. They don't discriminate on the basis of money. And I remember when Simone Biles couldn't compete in the Olympics, and I saw an interview with Michael Phelps, who has publicly admitted his struggles with mental health. And they had an interview, and I'll never forget what he said. It would be very nice if we could tell our mental health, hey, I got something going on today. Could you come back on Monday? But it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. No, it does not. And I think that you brought up a valid point. I too remember those conversations that both Simone and Michael Phelps had. And then it was, what was so beautiful to see is that when they started having those conversations, then you saw other athletes be like, wait a minute, if these two great stars on the biggest stage of the world watching is talking about they need to take a step back because their own mental health illnesses or mental health moments, to be like, wait a minute, I'm glad I'm not the only one. I need to talk about this too because of this, that. And then because there's so much cameras and attention on athletes, then you got people from other industries. It's like, well, wait a minute, they're on the bigger stage than I am, and I'm a CEO, I'm a COO. So it's not just me. So it again, it reminds us that we're human. We're human, and we're all gonna go through this journey called life with a lot of trials and tribulations. And to make us more aware that there is support there, we just have to be intentional and really, again, give ourselves permission to feel it. Like, look, there's something going on with me. I need to be in a safe space to not only admit that to myself, but to share it to those of my people. I'm like, this is how I'm feeling. It's overwhelming me. Let me just have my moment. So that's right on the ball, right on the ball.
And one thing that was important to me, um, since some of my wife's struggles were caused from work, but I've since learned, you can't put the blame on any job or any person. It's the individual's choice to end their life or to keep going.
Mm.
But, one thing that we did, I do for my wife every year, is with the help of Jen Gartner, who's somebody who works at University of Maryland, where my wife worked, and the Terps play tonight. Go Terps. Um, it was actually very hard for me. I work in football, as I told you, and my wife used to go to the Maryland games as
Mhm.
part of her job because she worked in donor relations. And I can remember when her coworkers came to the funeral, one of them told me a story that really hit home with me because it was something I remembered, only I kind of thought it was our secret. I didn't realize it was everyone who worked at Maryland's secret. In the suites, they have free food. And without fail, every game, either during halftime or sometime when she had a little break, Beth would call and say, "They have treats here." And I'm like, "What do they got?" And she, "They have Crispies treats. They have, do you want me to bring you one home?" And I, of course, inevitably would say, "Well, what do you think my answer is to that?"
Right.
Then this part I never knew. She would go to her work colleagues. She would take the napkins she was going to wrap them up in, and maybe it was to avoid embarrassment, but she would tell them, "I need to get two of these, one for me and one for Howie." And when they told me that, and that she had shared that with them, and that little thing, those are the things you miss. Like for the first season, I literally couldn't watch a Maryland football game. And it's a good thing I wasn't representing any coaches there at the time, because I just couldn't do it. Because every time I would turn that game on, I would think about my wife.
Right.
Now, 3 years later, I'm excited to watch the game tonight at 7:30. So you see little signs, like I'll say to my therapist sometimes, I'll say, like, "Lauren, I don't think I'm getting any better." She'll challenge me on that and say, "Well, you just told me you did this. I have chronic pain also. And one thing we were talking about, she's like, you told me you needed to catch up on this, so you made a phone call. You made an appointment with the physical therapist for next weekend. You know, so, and just the fact that I can tell you don't want to do this right now, but you showed up for this phone call anyway." She said, "I can guarantee you that you're getting better." And it's little things like that, like being able to enjoy a Maryland football game again. Those are the things that show myself that even though sometimes I don't think I'm getting better, that I am. And, I think I told you what I do, and I call it Beth Day. And on April 10th every year, which is the day she passed, myself and a couple friends, and I think it's a huge testament to her that last year, 2 years later, 6 of her coworkers were still there. And there's a song that I found by Will Dempsey called "Beat You There." And anybody that's experienced loss, I would encourage to listen to that song, because the meaning and the words make me feel like Beth is talking to me.
Wonderful.
Like,
Wonderful.
I know one of the lines talks about how, "Don't cry for me, I'm all right. I'm better than you know." And that's something I wonder about all the time. Like, we never really know, is there life after death? Because everybody only dies once.
Right.
And I often say to myself, like, because I'm more spiritual than I am religious, but I often wonder, like, is she gone, or can she really see how I'm living my life? And I just choose to pretend that she can. And I know what she would say to me, because she would say this to me when she was alive. And I know that if she saw how I was struggling and how some days I didn't do very much, I know exactly what she would say. She would say, "Don't use me as your excuse not to do well."
Wow. Deep. Very deep. Very deep. And I appreciate you sharing that as well. The fact that that's just one, I'm sure, of a gazillion memories that of your wife, and it helps you find healing in terms of your own journey, moving through this grief. That's beautiful, and I appreciate you sharing that. And you also touched on something regarding your spiritual practice a little bit, that you're more spiritual than that of a religious. How much has your spiritual practice changed or shifted um, throughout this whole area as a survivor of suicide loss, if at all?
A lot.
Okay.
um, Especially in the beginning.
Okay.
I had this is not really something that I ever believed in, but
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend that sent me some crystals, and maybe it was like a fidget spinner for me.
Mm-hmm.
If I would lose that little quartz one
Mm-hmm.
that's supposed to be for healing,
Mm-hmm.
I would have like a panic attack.
Oh wow.
I
Okay.
needed to find that crystal, and I
Mm-hmm.
needed to find it right then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So little things like that. um I think grief like this changes you. um so I don't think anybody can be the same person afterwards that they were before,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't mean that your life is over or that it has to change you for the worse. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that's not to say there aren't going to be days where you struggle. There aren't going to be days where you just can't do anything. And what I've learned, what we call that in therapy, is when you need to show yourself some grace. You need to allow yourself to feel those feelings. You need to allow yourself to cry if that's what you need to do. You need to allow yourself, if you need a mental health day, to do nothing. Now, you can't use that as an excuse and string 180 of those days in a row, or you will find that 6 months has passed and you're still in the exact same position that you were. And that's something that I'm still working on. Is I want to get more comfortable doing the things that are uncomfortable for me, like going out and meeting new people, going and, you know, something I'd never thought I'd have to do at my age, going to a meetup group to try to make new friends. Because I remember my dad, and I always used to make fun of him, and my dad would say, I'm good. I have enough friends. I don't
Mm-hmm.
need to go out to dinner with anybody that I don't already know. And I used to have the same attitude as my dad until this happened. And that kind of opened me up a little bit more to actually sitting down with some people I don't know that well, having lunch with them, or trying to make some new friends. And like I said, I'm still a work in progress, but one of my favorite phrases is broken crayons still color. Um, so you might be a little bit broken, but that doesn't mean that you can't function.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, Howard, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate you just sharing not only a piece of who you are, but who Beth was. For those of us who didn't have the pleasure of meeting her, and knowing her. So, my last question to you, for those who are survivors of suicide loss, or even those who may not experience such a loss, is there any type of, I don't want to say advice, but is there anything you'd like to share with those who may be going through or have experienced what it is that you've been through in terms of hope or just
I think
navigating life after loss?
the most important thing is get help. Um, and I know people that have done this without help, but for me, I couldn't have done it that way. Um, I needed help. Some people will say, well, I don't need a therapist. I just talk to my friends. And that's fine. I used to feel the same way. until I had some big problems that I really couldn't hash out with my friends. So I think the biggest thing is that, one, first of all, the way my wife, the way her life ended is not her entire being as a person. That's one part of her. The second thing is, you know, don't be ashamed. There's no guilt or shame in telling someone that your loved one committed suicide. Um, and anybody who would put the blame on you for that, shame on them. Because there were people that did try to blame me for what happened with my wife, and that made it infinitely more difficult for me.
Mm,
And
mm, mm.
you know, I don't. It's not something I try to talk about anymore because I'm trying to move past it. But those people know who they are, and you learn over time who the people that are going to be there for you and who the people that aren't. And but the most important thing is, I would say, is don't isolate, because when you internalize things and spend all your time by yourself, it makes it even more difficult, in my opinion, to move past this, or not move past it. I should say to live with it, because I
Mm.
don't think you ever really move past it.
Agreed. Agreed. I tell people it's not even grief is this type of any type of grief is not something you can get over. You can't get around it. You can't get under it. And you literally have to go through it and find the means to live with it by still going through it. It may, like you said, there are ebbs and flows. It may not be as much as it was 6 months ago, or it may be greater this one day. But then guess what? Fortunate enough to open your eyes and see another day, it may not be as hard. So I appreciate you being so candid and just putting it out there and saying that you need get the help. None of us are able to make it in this thing called life without having somebody present. It's just not. Whether you're listening to music, whether you are talking with someone, whether you are drawing, whether you're being active and intentional about meeting new people, it's about connection. It's about connections. It's about relationships with that of self and those who you feel safe enough to spend that time with. So, but Howard, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure speaking with you, and I just want to say from me to you again, my condolences, and I am so humbled to be in your presence for you to share your story and just to see your bravery to talk about this, because not too many people would feel comfortable enough to do this on this platform, but it is so needed, so needed. And I just thank you, thank you so much. And I look forward to staying in contact with you and talking with you some more about this. And hopefully we can do something even down the road, on both our ends. And for anybody else who is also in this space, please know that there is support out there. For those who are struggling, please call the Suicide Crisis Line, 988. It is very active and valid, and anybody who just wants to talk to somebody about this particular subject, there are people there who can assist you with that. And you know what? You don't have to go through this alone. None of us do. That's why we're here. We're here for a reason. So, but again, from me to you all, thank you so much for joining us on another episode. If it's not you, it's grief. We look forward to seeing you again in future episodes. And by all means, hey, Howard, before I let you go, if you would be kind enough, if people wanted to get in contact with you to kind of talk with you, what would be a great way for them to do so?
My Twitter is just at my name,
Okay.
and that's probably the easiest way to find me. But I'm readily findable on all forms of social media, again, because of what I do for work. So it's somewhat of a public job, which is why I'm used to talking to people, but not used to talking about this kind of topic. And I'll be honest with you, I only thought about canceling 14 times, but
Oh,
said to myself, I'm going to push through this and make my wife proud.
well, I thank you so much for not counseling, and I know she is. She is very, very proud of you for just being here and being present and sharing both your stories with us on a global level. So thank you so much. And for everybody else, I hope you all have a great day, great weekend. Go Maryland with the Turks playing tonight, I believe. So thank you all so much. Yes, you better wear your hat. wear the Terps proud. Wear the Terps proud. So otherwise, folks, we'll take care. We'll see you later next episode. And until then, just be well.
Thank you for listening, being intentional, and sharing this moment with us. We at It's Not You, It's Grief deeply understand the many facets of grieving, and we want to make sure we can be here for you. Again, thank you for listening, and tune in again wherever you subscribe to podcasts. We look forward to seeing you next time. Be well.